Hey beauties, welcome back to my channel. This week I'm focusing entirely on Chanel. So for today's video, I will be ranking my entire Chanel eyeshadow palette collection from my least favorite all the way down to my most favorite. I currently have 10 palettes here laid out in front, so we're gonna go through each one. I will show you swatches, and I will share my thoughts on every palette. Let's go ahead and get started. Coming in at number 10, the least favorite palette from my current collection is the Noir Supreme palette, 332. And it's worth noting that this is my collection. These are not all of the available palettes from Chanel. So of course I do like all of these, or at least I liked the idea of them, and that's why I went ahead and purchased them. But this palette is the palette that I get the least use out of. It is the least practical. And you can tell by looking at it, it is pretty one-dimensional. All of these eyeshadows, all four in the quad, are very dark. And this came out last fall, and I was really excited to pick it up because these shadows were sort of textured on top and they looked like fabric, and I thought it was just such a beautiful, different collection. It was very different from the collections that were being released by other brands at the time. So this stood out to me as being something worth picking up, simply to try. And as much as I don't hate these colors, it's just not a palette that I ever grab. Ever. Like, not once since last fall. Maybe I'll pull it out again now that, I'm taking a look at it. It's not a terrible palette. If you like smoky eyes, this is perfect for you. You just can't really do much with it. You have to use this along with something else. That's almost the appeal of the quad, is that you're supposed to get 4 different eyeshadows, an A, B, C, D, that work well together. They form a cohesive look, a cohesive color story, and you don't need something else. So if these were individuals, like they did the little lion singles last 2 holiday seasons ago, I picked up the black. I love that single black eyeshadow. I couldn't wear it by itself, but I can use it with other things, and it's the one shadow, so I don't mind pulling it out. I could never travel with this. I could never use this by itself unless I was doing a really extreme smoky eye. I think it was beautiful in the campaign. The campaign photos were so moody and very fall and just so beautiful and editorial. Even though this is my least favorite palette, I can still appreciate it, and I think the quality of these eyeshadows might be better than the quality of some of the other shadows in my collection. The only reason this is coming in at number 10 is because it is 4 dark eyeshadows in a very unwearable quad. Number 9 out of 10 is the Mystere Intensite number 304 eyeshadow palette. When this first launched, I saw that pink eyeshadow and I thought, wow, Chanel is really stepping out of the box. They're bringing us something different, so unique. And that was a while ago. It's been a couple years. And in the time since then, the quality has shifted dramatically. And they might even swatch pretty decent. I remember swatching this in a recent video and thinking, this isn't really making my point because they don't look terrible in the swatch. But when you use an eyeshadow brush, especially a fluffy brush, with these eyeshadows, they just don't really pick up. They're just not very pigmented. The color doesn't show up as intense. And perhaps age is a factor here, but this isn't my oldest palette. The next palette is years older than this one, and it's still ranked higher. I'm just not impressed with this palette any longer, and I would be very curious to compare this with a new version of this palette because I know it's still available. And since they've upgraded their formula, I wonder if that has carried over to some of the older palettes that they were creating before they changed. Perhaps the new version of this is better. I struggle to apply this on my eyes. I think at some point soon I will probably get rid of this palette. So this next palette, I think this is the oldest palette in my collection. It has to be because this came from Nashville, and I want to say I got this early on. So we've been in Miami, I think, close to 4 years. We were in Nashville for about 2, so this could be close to 5 or 6 years old. It's pretty old, and it's an old name. So this is 226 Tisse Rivoli. On clients at the counter, this was the #1 palette that I would steer them towards. I would apply this on everybody, and I thought it was just the best palette offered by Chanel. It's been a while since I have touched it because it is so old, and I think the color is very different. I would still consider this to be one of the best eyeshadow palettes from Chanel, and it is still one of my favorite palettes. This ranks so low simply because I have an old version. It's not like they produced this palette one time and they haven't produced palettes like this since. So if you pick up Rivoli now, it's going to be new, it's going to be fresh, and it will apply beautifully to your eyes. And even application, I'm sure I would have a better time using this versus the other palette because it's neutral. So these browns right here, and this is such a unique shade. I love this kind of deep, cool-toned brown with the shimmer, stunning. This kind of pearlescent shade and then the rose gold, these would be a lot easier to work with versus the pink purple. It's about time for this palette to be decluttered as well. I just have so many memories tied to this palette. It brings me back to working at the Chanel counter, living in Nashville, that fresh start, changing careers from broadcasting to cosmetics, and how much fun I had doing makeup every day at the counter and just the overall experience. So this palette is very nostalgic to me, and it's hard for me to imagine my makeup collection without a Rivoli palette. I'm sure you guys have some pieces in your collection, perhaps they're not old like this, but you just never want to go without them, or you can't really see yourself getting rid of them because they have extra meaning, extra value to you. Number 7 is one of the 9-pan eyeshadow palettes. This is the edition number 2 Quintessence palette. I thought this was so stunning when I first picked it up, and then later on I decided that this was one of my least favorite luxury purchases. I have since changed my mind again. I don't think this palette is that bad. It looks a little bit uninspired. It's sort of all over the place. It's hard for me to look at this palette and instinctively know what look I'm going to create. And there are beautiful shades here. I mean, these colors are stunning. All of the metallics are beautiful. But then this blue and this red and the green, there's something about it, it just doesn't make sense when I look at this palette. I will say that the quality of these eyeshadows is amazing. This is much better than any of the quads that I've talked about so far. So I don't know, I'm sort of torn about this palette. I do really love it, but it's not something that I ever grab, and for that reason it comes in at number 7. The middle of the list is where things start to get a little dicey. Number 4, 5, and 6 are all interchangeable. It would just be too difficult for me to try to put these in any order, and they are so different, and yet I really cannot differentiate between them for the purpose of ranking them. So here I have the 334 Modern Glamour palette. I also have the 342 Lumiere Opulence palette. This was last holiday. And then I have the 316 Cristal de Printemps palette. This came from spring last year. Between these three, I just don't know. Let's see. Let's see if I can hold these all together. Here they are. So you can see they are very different. It's kind of awkward to hold them like this. But I just love each and every one of these palettes, and they serve a different purpose. So I think that is very difficult to compare apples and oranges. If it's a palette that I would wear for evening, smoky eye look, these palettes would be terrible for that occasion. This palette would be amazing. And that's why I've always loved this Modern Glamour palette, 334, because you look at it and you know, okay, this is for smoky eyes. I know exactly where to put these colors, and there's something about it that is so simple. Black and white are of course the colors of the Chanel logo. They're color codes of the house, so there is so much meaning in this palette. I think it is so inspired and beautiful. But at the same time, I think this is just a really easy palette. If I'm going out in the evening and I want a smoky look, I can pick this up and create something really pretty in a matter of minutes. Now with this palette, this is more spring. This is the Cristal de Printemps. This is the same way. It's very easy to use. I look at this and I kind of know instinctively what I'm going to do with it. You can make it a little bit darker if you want, but this isn't a palette that I'm going to pull out for evening. This is going to be something that I'll use for daytime. The pinks and the purples, this is so pretty. I don't use this palette as much as I should. I really don't even use the Modern Glamour palette as much as I should. Maybe going into fall, winter, I'll pick that up again, or even just when I'm allowed to leave the house, because I have nowhere to go that requires a smoky eye, I'll tell you that. But this palette is a little bit more wearable. I guess for that reason, maybe this could bump up a little bit higher on the list. Even though it's wearable, I still don't use it as much. I should pull that out, I really should. And then here, the Lumiere Opulence palette. Earth tones, neutrals, these shades are so wearable. My one complaint about this palette would be that they're all shimmery. So I would probably need to use a matte eyeshadow in conjunction with this, or I might have to pull something else in. They're beautiful. The colors are stunning. I mean, this is, again, a very easy everyday palette. You could also come up with evening looks as well. I think it is very elegant, but because it's all shimmery, this might be something I would say for special occasions or an elevated affair. This wouldn't be my everyday palette. I just don't want that much shimmer on a daily basis. That's just me. Out of these three palettes, the only one that's no longer available is the Cristal de Printemps palette, but it looks very similar to this year's, and there's always something similar. This is a very popular color story from Chanel. At any given time, you can probably find 2 or 3 palettes that look similar. They won't be the same, but certainly you can achieve the same look, the same vibe with your makeup. This was very ethereal, soft, springtime. We've now reached the top 3 palettes. I'm excited. Coming in at number 3 is the Edition number 1 Alfresco eyeshadow palette. This is the palette that I am wearing today on my eyes, and it is still one of the most beautiful eyeshadow palettes that Chanel has ever come out with. I believe this was one of the first collections from Lucia Pica when she came on board with Chanel. I know it wasn't her first, but it might have been her second. This was released as part of a spring collection, and the entire collection blew me away. It was so colorful and vibrant, and at the time, Chanel didn't have a lot of collections like that, so it was very different for Chanel. She gave us mattes, shimmers, metallics, jewel tones, earth tones. It's such a versatile palette. You can do so many things, and I wore this palette non-stop when I picked this up. I thought it was going to be the only palette that I would ever wear. So beautiful. I will say that the quality of the eyeshadows has increased so much from the time that this was created. I wish there would be a new version using their new formula, because when I was using this today, I thought, you know, this is pretty. The shadows are blending, they look pigmented, they're showing up, but it is a little bit chalky, a little bit dusty compared to some of the newer palettes. Even still, I'd consider this to be definitely one of my favorites, but just one of the best Chanel eyeshadow palettes of all time. This is an instant classic for me. So beautiful. It's iconic. When people talk about old Chanel products, this is one of those products that they'll talk about like, do you remember that Alfresco palette? Do you remember? Ranking the top 2 palettes came down to availability. So coming in at number 2 is the Beige Indespensables. I don't know why I went there. This is the Beige Natural Eyeshadow Palette, the one and only. Still highly coveted, still highly requested. To this day, I receive so many questions about this eyeshadow palette. And would you know that when this came out, I was under the impression that it was going to be in line. It was not limited edition. Come to find out that it sold out and it's gone. So sad. It is so unfortunate that this is no longer available because these colors are so wearable. This is the perfect neutral eyeshadow palette. Now, I don't own any of the Urban Decay Naked palettes. I know there are several other palettes from every other brand that look nearly identical to this. But for Chanel, this is one of the best products they've ever come out with. So pigmented, virtually no fallout. I have never struggled with fallout, even using some of the darker eyeshadows. Anytime I've used this eyeshadow palette, the quality is top notch. You could use this every single day. Had Les Beige still been available, it would have easily been number 1, but since it's not, I decided to go with a palette that is still available, and it truly is just the best palette. This is the Warm Memories eyeshadow quad from Chanel. This was released for spring this year. It is still available on the website, and it is beautiful. These are the eyeshadows I'm talking about when I say that Chanel has improved their quality. They're so smooth and silky, they actually feel creamy to the touch. And the color payoff is amazing. I think you could put these head to head with some of the best eyeshadows on the market and they could compete. They are just so beautiful. I personally really love this color story. I think this is very flattering for green eyes, blue eyes, but even brown eyes. I think any eye color would look beautiful in this palette. And you have some medium intensities. You have a deep, you have this really pretty kind of peachy shimmer shade. It's just a beautiful quad. It's concise. 4 shadows. That's it. You're not gonna open this up and feel overwhelmed like, ooh, what am I gonna do today? I'm just not sure. It's simple. The only shadow you're missing would be an inner corner highlight shade, but I often think that it's sort of a waste to include that shade in the quad because you're gonna use a highlighter for your face. You can always use that on the inner corner as a brow highlight. We all own millions of little pearl eyeshadows. It's silly to include that when you could put another color in there. I always really love my makeup whenever I use warm memories. This would be my #1 recommendation for anybody who is shopping for a Chanel eyeshadow palette. And that completes today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Leave me your comments, your questions down below. Be sure to share your thoughts on my ranking. But I also would be very curious to hear your most favorite palette as well as your least favorite palette. So drop me a comment. We'll keep the conversation going there. As always, I will be linking everything mentioned, everything that I have today on my face down below in the description box for your convenience. And for more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.